Domain expansion. Without a doubt, domain expansion has become one of, if not the most iconic ability in anime that has come out in the last decade. While obviously inspired by previous series, the concept of a character essentially creating their own battle arena to give themselves an advantage in a fight is awesome. From this concept, talented artists have taken the domain expansion out of JJK and applied it to other series, from Toy Story to Mickey Mouse. So today, I thought, what if another anime series had that power system? What would their domains look like? What would they do? What would their names be? What if Dragon Ball characters had domain expansions? In this video, I'll be going over some of the main and most iconic characters in Dragon Ball Z, discussing what I think their domain expansions might be if they had them. Naturally, this is not strictly about power scaling, rather, it's more so just using this as an opportunity to talk about two series that I like a lot. Firstly though, I'll explain what domain expansions actually do and how they work for those who don't know, so I don't have to explain it again for each character I talk about. If you just want to know what I think of a specific character or what their domain expansion might be, even though I'm not covering every single Dragon Ball character, I should have timestamps down below so you can skip around and find the one that you're most interested in. Of course, if I don't cover a character that you'd like to see me talk about today, or you have a different interpretation of how their domain expansion might work, make sure to let me know in the comments down below. Besides that, if you like this kind of stuff, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's jump right in. Now, while a good part of domain expansions are explained to us in the series itself, a lot of the information is still unfortunately only found within guides that are not released alongside the actual manga. To begin, domain expansion is essentially the highest level technique possible, being known as true Jujutsu sorcery that should only be used as a last resort finishing move. To put it most simply, and quoting directly from Gojo here, this is domain expansion, an environment constructed with cursed energy and manifested through a cursed technique. Constructing a domain uses a ton of cursed energy but can be worth it. First off, you get an upgrade in stats due to the environment, kind of like a buff in video games. Guides go further to explain that what a domain expansion's environment is actually the innate domain of the user, or the inside of their heart, like a realm for their soul. Thus, it actually pretty heavily reflects their background, life, or just generally who they are. For example, Sukuna's is a massive temple of bones, Gojo is literally a visualization of his limitless technique, and both Jogo and Dagon's are essentially recreations of what disasters created them in the first place. Domain expansions also have a sure hit effect, and are manifested through a curse technique, essentially making it so that whatever the domain creator's ability is becomes undodgeable. Now, there are a whole bunch of other mechanics that go into domain expansions, like what domains recognize as targets, how to break a domain, the size of domain, and the like, but for this video, that's all we need to know before we can hop right in. In this scenario, you can look at it two ways. Either Dragon Ball characters get like isekai'd into the world of JJK and become humans or curse spirits while retaining their memories and personality. Or, alternatively, in Dragon Ball, domain expansions are just a thing that key manipulation can grant you, so pretty powerful characters all are going to use it. While I could have started with Goku here, I wanted to start with the first three characters that I actually thought of while making this video and writing the script, and they're the three main villains of Dragon Ball Z: Frieza, Cell, and Buu. Now, let's start in chronological order with our first Dragon Ball character. Frieza. What would his domain expansion be? I think most logically, the appearance of Frieza's domain would absolutely resemble either his spaceship or the general outer space that he is constantly conquering. It would probably almost be identical to his fight with Bardock. Frieza and his opponent floating in space among a sea of stars. What would this domain actually be called? This one felt fairly obvious, and sounds pretty cool to me at least. Frieza Force. Even though his character has somewhat changed since Dragon Ball Super, Frieza has always been, for the most part, incredibly lazy, having his henchmen do things for him instead of him just handling it himself. Thus, I believe his domain should reflect that. The sure hit effect of his domain would work very similar to Dagon's domain. Instead of summoning an ocean of fish Shikigami, Frieza instead summons members of the Frieza Force with his guaranteed hit effect. This could be effective in two ways, either completely surrounding and smothering enemies like the Frieza Force did against Bardock, or firing sneak attacks to off-guard opponents while they're busy, like with how Goku got off-guarded by Sorbet in Resurrection F. I could totally see Frieza opening this domain against the Z fighters on Namek, trapping them in space where they have to battle the Ginyu Force until Goku breaks through the barrier and attacks Frieza directly in his own domain. Next up is Cell. For Cell, I think his domain expansion would be even more obvious than Frieza's. What would it be? The Cell games. The domain itself would obviously then look identical to the Cell games arena, though I think it would actually extend beyond that and have surrounding area just like the show. Now, for the actual sure hit of this expansion, for this one, I think the boost aspect of the domain would be the most important part, rather than the sure hit effect. This domain specifically would function a lot like Hikari's domain, but instead of gambling, it would have to do with abiding by the rules of the Cell games. The rule of this domain is very simple. An individual who is currently touching the Cell games ring, or is, quote, in bounds, receives a substantial boost to their ki or cursed energy, and, for Cell specifically, his regeneration, or, in the case of Jujutsu Kaisen, his reverse curse technique, increases in speed. Thus, the main goal is to knock the other person out of the ring while keeping oneself in the domain, which is the main objective of the Cell games before Cell blew the arena up. I think this one specifically would give a boost to both individuals, essentially being the opposite of Higuruma's domain, essentially encouraging people in the domain to fight instead of making it so they can't. Due to its effects being completely fair, the increase in energy would be even more massive than it was just in favor of Cell. After all, Cell would want to fight his opponents when they're at the peak of their power or as strong as possible, and this is quite literally a perfect way to do that. However, it could also backfire, just like it did for Cell when he caused Gohan to go Super Saiyan 2, so I think this one is really fitting. Next up is Buu. Now, for this one, when I came up with this domain expansion, I was specifically thinking of Super Buu rather than Kid Buu or Fat Buu, given how I don't think either of those two would necessarily be skilled or intelligent enough to use domain expansion. To a degree, Buu is one of the actual few characters who almost already has a domain expansion. Instead of spreading his environment around others, though, he puts you into his. Thus, I'd like to call this domain Inside Buu. This domain would perfectly resemble this scene, where Goku and Vegeta are shrunken down inside Buu and are confronted by a shrunken down Super Buu. I see this domain thus functioning a lot like Mahito's domain expansion, essentially being that if you're touching any parts of his domain, wall, or floors, you would be touching Buu himself. Now, I had two different ideas for what curse technique could be deployed through this domain. The first would just be absorption, that being that he saps away the strength of those touching him before absorbing them completely and taking their strength. The second concept would be based around Buu's magic, turning you into candy, turning the domain into a similarly powerful one-shot if anyone gets touched by it or trapped inside. While that may feel insanely overpowered, it also feels exactly like something Buu would have, so let me know which one you think he'd have. Now, let's talk about a few good guys. Of course, I don't think every Z fighter would necessarily be powerful enough to wield a domain expansion, given how it's really only ability that the top tier characters in Jujutsu Kaisen have access to. So someone like Bulma or Yajirobe would probably not have a domain expansion. If Dragon Ball actually had domains in the story, I believe the first character who would use a domain expansion would absolutely be Master Roshi. He's kind of the guy who knows pretty much everything, so let's begin with his domain. Now, I have two conflicting ideas for what Master Roshi's domain could be, either domain expansion Kame House or domain expansion Mafuba. The first domain expansion would quite obviously replicate Kame House with a small island, house, and beach. Now, Roshi's main thing was being a teacher and mastering the Kamehameha after years of training, and thus his domain abides by a very simple rule. You must fire a Kamehameha or get hit by one. Essentially, this domain would be like Naoya's with his 24-frame movement rule, but with firing Kamehameha instead of the movement of your cells. If a character does anything else or tries and fails to do a Kamehameha, they get blasted. I think this is a cool way for Roshi to use his domain almost as a way to be a teacher, but also get surpassed once every main good guy picks up the Kamehameha. The other idea is the Mafuba, a domain that would function similarly to the Smallpox curse, which would simply trap a person in a domain and close it around them and trap them in an object. If they can't escape, the domain kills them or traps them or seals them, turning them into a cursed object, kind of like the prison realm. I really like both of these ideas, and they fit Roshi in different ways. If I had to pick one, the former is thematically more aligned to Roshi as a character, while the latter is probably an overall stronger ability. So let me know which one you think he should have. Next, let's talk about Vegeta. Now, honestly, I had a lot of trouble coming up with something for Vegeta that I was really satisfied with. And what I came up with is that different eras of Vegeta would have different domain expansions, depending on when he gained the ability. Of course, this is not how domain expansions work, but this video is already a hypothetical, so I don't really care. During the Saiyan Saga and before, his domain expansion would be incredibly simple, creating a space in which there's a full moon or Brutz waves, essentially allowing him to instantly become a Great Ape instead of throwing a power ball. However, in Namek and beyond, I think Vegeta's domain would be something like Zenkai Zone. Both on Namek and all the way through to the Granola arc in the manga, Vegeta's growth and fighting style was all about taking damage and using it to get stronger. And I think his domain would function exactly around this notion. This domain, which I'm not sure what it would look like, would in some way involve increasing Vegeta's strength the more damage he takes. The only way I can think of this working is somehow reversing the short hit effect of the domain to force the opponent to attack, but this is essentially just letting an opponent hit Vegeta with a domain for free, which feels wrong. So really, let me know what you guys think about this one. And finally, for this video, let's talk about Goku. Now, I've seen some hypothetical Goku domains given crazy names like Exploding Mega Dragon Z-Zone, but I honestly think Goku's domain would be infinitely more simple than that, both in name and complex. Of course, it wouldn't be like a literally simple domain, but I think Goku's domain expansion would be Mount Paozu. This place is incredibly close to Goku's heart. After all, it's the place he grew up. And all the way to the Torment of Power, that mountain is one of the first things that Goku thinks of when he unlocks Ultra Instinct. As for this ability, I believe that he would simply use it as a short hit, allowing his Ki Blast to automatically hit his opponent no matter what. Combined with something like Ultra Instinct's capacity to dodge every attack, this would be a crazy combination of abilities, having infinite accuracy and infinite dodging at the same time, all while fighting in a location identical to his peaceful childhood home. I don't want this script to go on for too long, so for now, this is where I'm going to end it. If you want me to cover other characters or other series and what their domain expansions might be, let me know down in the comments below. See ya!